We have made it to another offseason here in the St. Louis Dragons franchise here in Madden 24. As today we will very quickly do our final recap of the season, but we'll be spending most of the episode on the re-signing stage and, of course, free agency. So last episode we had the NFC Championship, in which we unfortunately lost to the Carolina Panthers 23-13, a game that we were playing pretty well early. However, we scored 0 points in the second half, and our defense, which had not allowed a touchdown through the first 38 minutes of the game, ultimately let a couple in late. Chance Matamolo, all things considered, wasn't bad at all. He was arguably better than Bryce Young, to be honest, but we really couldn't run the ball, and I think DeAndre Swift getting injured was kind of the turning point. Jamison Williams also got hurt, so that meant we saw a lot of Griffin Weaver, and there was only so much we could do without our starting quarterback and our 3 best offensive skill position players not healthy. The defense was really good for the first 3.5 quarters, and give them credit, they've been very good over the last couple of months, but they couldn't hold on late. A couple of big drives by Bryce Young was ultimately enough to get the job done. And as we go into the offseason, we're in an interesting spot because we have a lot of money to spend, $166 million in cap space. We've got quite a few good starters on both sides of the ball who are due for extensions, but we do have some flexibility in the short term. Not so much the long term, because we're going to have to pay both Puma Whitlock and Simeon Bonnet within the next year or so, not to mention Arturo Modelo as well. Those 3 players combined might sign for $1 billion. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you get the point. So we've already kind of recapped the season for our team. We already did our studs and duds of the year. But I do want to take a look at the rest of the league, just kind of to show you guys where we are 4 years into the future in terms of stats and awards and all that. Of course, our very own Puma Whitlock was the front runner for the MVP before he got hurt in Week 16. Ultimately fell to 7, with Patrick Mahomes winning the award. As for the AFC, pretty much the usual suspects. Brandon Ayuk wins the best receiver for the Texans. That's pretty cool. As for the NFC, Modelo finishes 3rd for Offensive Player of the Year. Simeon Bonnet, of course, wins DPOY with DeMore Diggins in 10th. And then we also had Bonnet win the best defensive lineman with Modelo, Diggins, Devin White, Owen Popo, Ryan Jensen, Puma Whitlock, and Cameron Dicker also in the running for major awards. Here's a look at the passing statistics around the year. I wouldn't say Puma Whitlock's numbers would have been on pace to be better than Mahomes, Burrow, or Dak, but they would have been right up there. Kenneth Walker in Seattle wins the rushing title. Of course, we did not have any 1,000-yard rushers. We have never had one in this series. CeeDee Lamb, the leading receiver, although Arturo Modelo is arguably the next best receiver in the NFL, which speaks to how good he was. In terms of the offensive line, Logan DiNardo allowed by far the most sacks. And then in terms of defense, we got to do it by conference because Madden's weird like that. Simeon Bonnet led the NFL in tackles for loss and sacks by a landslide. Let's take a look at all of the superstar and superstar XFactors who have entered our league over the last 3 seasons, and these include a lot of the new rookies. Obviously, we've got Puma and Bonnet as XFactors, and then looking down at the superstars, again, some new faces as well. These are only for players who are above 75 overall, keep in mind, so not everybody might show up here, but obviously a number of young guys and a number of Dragons, including, spoiler alert, Arturo Modelo, who moved up to superstar development, which I guess that's pretty cool and very well deserved after the year that he had. I briefly showed the Pro Bowl rosters at the end of the last episode, but in case we want a quick refresher, the Dragons ended up with 8. Puma Whitlock, Arturo Modelo. Modelo didn't show up on the roster because he's hurt, but he made it. Isaiah Likely, Ryan Jensen, Simeon Bonnet, DeMore Diggins, and Cameron Dicker. I think one or both of our linebackers could have made it. Also an argument for JMO, but oh well. Let's take a look at all the players who went up in development trait. Nobody here on offense, although Modelo's not on the screen because he's hurt. On defense, we had 1 player move up. No major surprise, that being DeMore Diggins, who finished 3rd in the NFL in interceptions. He's going to go up to star development. Simeon Bonnet, meanwhile, can move up to a 99. He won't, but he's now a 98. That is frightening. It's not so long ago he was an 80 overall rookie with normal development, and now he will likely break the bank, signing as probably the highest paid defensive player ever. As for Modelo, he moves up to superstar, but The rule with the stud and dud of the year would require him to go down in development trait because we already gave him a boost. However, I'm going to make an executive decision here and let him keep his superstar because, he was so good this year. Now, if you guys strongly disagree with this, I would be happy to move it back down. But in doing that, we're not going to punish Devonte Wyatt. With Modelo moving up by the game, Devonte Wyatt would have been the next guy on the stud of the year list to get a dev increase, so he'll move up to star. He'll be 29 years old next year, so I don't think that's going to be like that big of a deal for his development, but I suppose it's something. Let's take a look at the Super Bowl result. We've got the 2 seeds, the Carolina Panthers and Bryce Young against Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. And finally, Lamar gets over the hump, leading the Ravens to the Super Bowl over the Panthers 24-14 and another really low-scoring game. Lamar Jackson was really good, while Bryce Young was very mediocre. The AFC Offensive Rookie of the Year, Cornelius Reese, scored twice, while the man he replaced, Mark Andrews, had 1 catch for 6 yards. Safe to say the Ravens made a good decision letting Mandrews walk and going with the rookie. So that'll bring us into retirements. You may notice our team rating went down from an 86 to an 84 with retirements and regression. We are actually a pretty old team, as the list here features guys like Tyler Lockett, Devontae Adams, Byron Jones, Javon Hargrave, Tyrann Mathieu, Keenan Allen, and then 3 from our team, Derrick Henry, Grady Jarrett, and Morgan Moses. Of these 3, I would honestly argue that Morgan Moses might be the biggest loss. When he was on the field, he was a great player for us. As for Jarrett and Henry, they both gave us some good moments this year, but it's clear that both of those guys were not the players they once were. They'll bow out gracefully. Here are some of the unsigned retiring players as well, and that does it for the list. Next up, we're going to go over the coaching carousel. Some changes around the league in terms of head coaches. 6 ended up being fired. We'll start with the Green Bay Packers, who had the worst record in the league at 3-14. They get the number 1 pick. And the Packers have been kind of a mess as of recent. They've got some fun players, such as Offensive Rookie of the Year, Khaled Garrison, but their mismanagement of Jordan Love was very perplexing. Love played well for them, but they still replaced him for Johnny Gordon, who ended up being quite a bit worse. So they're going to hire Dave Canales, who's been the offensive coordinator in Carolina over the last couple of seasons. He's been a big piece in the development of Bryce Young. The Titans fire head coach Lou Anarumo after just 1 season. So the Titans are going to go to their 4th different coach at the series. Remember, they had Brian Callahan for 2 years. I just want to point out I predicted the future there. They have Otto Askew at quarterback, former top pick, who hasn't quite developed. The Titans tried to build their roster through free agency, and it didn't really work out. They want to go back to an offensive mind, rolling with Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator of the Ravens, who obviously just won a Super Bowl. The Saints, at 5-11-1, end up firing their coach, Shane Waldron. And I don't really get this one. Waldron had finally shown some progress with this team at the end of this season, but ultimately the Saints are going to go in a different direction, hiring Ryan Nielsen, who's been the defensive coordinator out in Jacksonville with the Jaguars. The Raiders are finally going to cut the cord on Josh McDaniels. It's been 5 years too long. They can finally start fresh, as they will ultimately go with Matt Burke, who has been the defensive coordinator in Houston. I get that DeMeco Ryans is the defensive play caller there, but Burke has still been a big piece of that defense. The Commanders fire Mike LaFleur after 3 seasons, and they will ultimately choose to hire Ben Johnson, who's on his 2nd trip as a head coach. He was the coach of the Buccaneers in Season 2. They were pretty decent compared to where they've been throughout this series. They still fired him. I don't really know why. But he'll get another opportunity with, ironically, Washington, the team who hates him in real life. It's weird how things end up working, but he'll get another crack at being a head coach. And then last but not least, the Colts fired Drew Petzing after 2 seasons, another one that I really don't feel like made sense. Anthony Richardson finally showed some development throughout his career, and he got a nice extension out of it. But Jim Irsay wants to go in a different direction. The Colts appear to be possibly hitting the panic button a little bit. And it sucks for us because they ended up taking our defensive coordinator, Dave Merritt, who's been the DC for a couple of seasons. He was originally the Chiefs cornerback coach, a big piece in the development of guys like Trent McDuffie and L'Jarius Sneed. Comes over here, big piece in the development of our corners, such as younger guys like Cam Lucifer, Demore Diggins, and even the career revival of Jeff Okudah. And our defense as a whole really improved. throughout this season, but now we're going to need a new coordinator. I want to stick with our 4-3 scheme, so we're going to hire Lou Anarumo, who was just fired by the Titans, the former Bengal defensive coordinator. That way we don't need to make a drastic change schematically. All right, now that we've made it through the staff week, we can make it into player re-signings. Finally, the juicy stuff. We've got a lot of money in cap space. With those guys retiring, our number goes up to $188 million. So nearly $200 million in the bank to spend. Now, again, we've got to be smart here. We have to pay Puma. We've got to pay Bonnet. We've got to pay Modelo, etc., etc. We don't have a boatload of money to spend on all these guys, even if it looks like we do. We've got multiple notable starters looking for new deals, including Jedrick Wills, B.J. Ojulari, DeAndre Swift, Owen Popo, John Johnson, Lane Johnson, and others. So we'll start with Jedrick Wills, who's been our left tackle over the last 2 seasons, and he's been a good player for us when he's been on the field, and that's been the thing with him. He was really good this year, but he missed 6 games, and he's missed 8 total over the last 2 years. On the offensive line, I'm looking for someone who can be reliable and steady on the field, and I'd rather get somebody for maybe less money who's just as good and actually plays. As for B.J. Ojulari, he missed some time this year as well, but I feel like his best football is ahead of him. I think he's our second best edge rusher behind Simeon Bonnet. We're going to look to give him a 2-year extension for around $24 million, and he says no. The tag is for like $30 million, so it appears that he'll be hitting the open market. Next up is DeAndre Swift, who regressed quite a bit, now 28 years old, not the same player he once was, but I feel like he had the best season of his career last year, but again, when healthy. He's missed 12 games over the last 2 years. That's a lot. When he's been on the field, especially this year, he was really good. But at 28 years old, with a major injury history, I don't want to give him a multi-year deal. I think it would be in our best interest to look younger at running back. I'm not opposed to bringing him back, but for 1 year and for cheap. Owen Popo is a lot easier of the decision here, and an easy yes. Popo has improved in every season he's been a starter with us. He is such a key cog to this defense alongside Devin White. We're going to look to give him a 4-year player-friendly deal, and he says no. We offered 4 years for around close to $40 million. The tag is $21 million, so it looks like he might be hitting the open market as well. We're really striking out here. Some of these guys we're not going to look to bring back. I feel like they're asking for too much money. I do like Chuck Reed as safety depth. He'll return for the next 2 years. King Sean Tucker, I'm going to look to bring him back for 4 years as running back depth. He says no. Jelani Tavai's been a solid starter since day 1 for us, but he's 30. He's regressing. I think it would make sense to get younger at linebacker, and we're also letting Nakobe Dean walk there as well. Sincere Lorenzo's a solid depth tight end. I tried to offer him 2 years, but he says no. We've got all this money still left. I think it makes sense to overspend for a guy like Lane Johnson, who was really good this year. He only missed 1 game. He was pretty healthy. And at 37, he hasn't lost much of the beat. 1 year, $20 million. He is back as the right tackle. That brings us to our 2 defensive tackles, Javon Kinlaw and Devontae Wyatt. Wyatt, we've got to bring back. 1 year for around $9 million. As for Kinlaw, he's a good player when he's healthy, but he is never on the field. How many games has he missed in this series? Well, it's a lot. He's missed 20 over the last 2 years. Not to mention, he missed 10 in the previous 2, so he's missed 30 games over the last 4 years. We're able to re-sign DeMar Hamlin. Ryan Jensen's 37. He's regressed a lot, but his play on the field has still been really good, and he played every game for us this year. So why not bring him back for 1 year? He says yes. And then last but not least, Cameron Dicker, the kicker, had a strong season for us. He's back. So we don't re-sign most of our big guys here, but we re-sign a number of depth players. We bring back Lane Johnson and Ryan Jensen on the offensive line. We re-sign Devontae Wyatt. So now that poses the question of what do we do with the franchise tag? The 2 guys who we're looking at in particular are Ojulari and Popo. The franchise tag for Owen Popo is $22 million. For B.J. Ojulari, it's $29 million. That feels like too much for both of them. But I looked at the list of players who have been tagged this year, and the list includes guys like Brian Branch, Shaq Thompson, 36-year-old Khalil Mack. In other words, if those guys are getting the tag, then we should probably use it on one of these 2. In particular, Owen Popo, I think, would be the right choice. He's cheaper than B.J. Ojulari. I think he's better than B.J. Ojulari, and he would be a bigger loss if we hypothetically were to not re-sign him. The fact that guys like Shaq Thompson are being franchise tagged tells me that the defense in this free agency class likely will not be very good, and thus Owen Popo would be sought after very heavily. So because of that, we cannot let him go. We're going to give him the franchise tag for $22 million. I know it's a lot of money. That was basically his asking price for 3 years, but I don't think we really have a choice. And I think he's a guy who is not expendable for how important he is to our defense. The last order of business before we hit free agency is deciding what we do with Puma Whitlock's 5th-year option for $62 million. Keep in mind, this is what he would be making next season, not this upcoming one. So the decision here with Puma Whitlock is actually pretty fascinating to me because I contemplated not taking the option just so we could give him his long-term extension sooner rather than later. But I think I will give it to him for the sole purpose that both him and Simeon Bonnet have a low re-sign interest. Neither of them appeared to be willing to take a discount to help the team. They both want to get paid the bag. And I think having them up for an extension in the same year might be a little bit dangerous because if things go south, we're going to be only able to tag one of them. Obviously, we would pick Puma Whitlock because he's our quarterback. That would mean Simeon Bonnet would hit the open market, which just sounds like a disaster. So because of that, we're going to give Puma Whitlock the 5th-year option. Once he signs his extension, he'll be making around $60 million a year anyway. So this is going to be pretty regular for him. And this way, we don't have to worry about paying both Bonnet and Whitlock at the same time. So with that, we'll be hopping into free agency with around $120 million to spend after re-signing guys and giving Owen Popo the franchise tag. So that is a lot of money, but again, you got to keep in mind, we have a lot of guys to pay upcoming. Simeon Bonnet and Puma Whitlock will likely take up $100 million next year, so keep that in mind. The free agency class isn't the best. There are some intriguing players at the top, such as Tyreek Hill and Kyle Hamilton, but overall, it is a pretty weak group. So I think what we've got to do is try to find some diamonds in the rough who could be starting level players for us and not necessarily take big swings because while we have a lot of money now, we're not going to have a lot of money in a year from now when, again, Puma and Bonnet are going to be making $100 million. So as we look at possible positions of need, left tackle opens up, running back opens up, and then on the defensive side of the ball, it never hurts to add more pass rushers. We're probably going to need a couple more linebackers. Safety's a position I think we could look at as well. And if these positions aren't addressed, we very well could look at them in the draft. Obviously, we don't have any super big contracts now. Only 2 guys making over $15 million. But again, Puma and Bonnet alone are going to be taking up close to half of our cap space next year. And they've earned it. They are at that level. So because of that, we have to be smart here with how we spend. We can give out big one-year deals. That's fine. But we can't be necessarily breaking the bread on Tyreek Hill or Kyle Hamilton as good as those guys are. We're going to start with B.J. Ojulari. He's a guy who I don't want to let go. In terms of the pass rushers in this free agency class, I think there are some intriguing ones. But I think for Ojulari's price, it's going to be worth it. We're going to give him a little bit more money, though. A 2-year deal for around $33 million, which is a lot of money, but I really believe in him going forward. I like what Jedrick Wills has been able to do for us over the last few years, but he's injury prone. Jawan Taylor, I think, gives us 90% of Wills' play, but he's not as injury prone. He had his worst year with the Chiefs this year, but still a very productive player. He's only missed 2 games over the last 4 seasons in Kansas City. We're going to give him a 1-year deal for $26 million. It's a lot of money, but again, it's 1 year. It's fine. Malik Hooker was a guy who I wanted to trade for at the deadline from the Cowboys. They were unwilling to budge. I don't really know why. But he's here in free agency, and I think it'd be worth shooting an offer. John Johnson played pretty well for us, but we're going to let him go. And I think Malik Hooker's a better player, which is why I'm going to make the move. We let go of Nakobe Dean and Jelani Tavai, so we're going to need another linebacker to join the group we've already got. And I think I'm going to offer Trenton Simpson, a talented young player who hasn't gotten a ton of playing time in Baltimore, sitting behind Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen. But I think for him being our 3rd or 4th linebacker, a 1-year deal wouldn't be too bad. Our last player we're going to offer here, this is probably going to be the biggest one, and that's going to be George Karlaftis. I don't think we're going to get him because I'm only going to give him a one-year deal. But again, it never hurts to add more pass rushing. Even if we do bring back B.J. Ojulari, I think it'd be worth adding another guy. Karlaftis has been kind of disappointing with the Chiefs, which is another reason why I don't want to give him a super long-term deal. But 1 year for $20 million I think is fair because he'll be off the books next year. So these are going to be our 5 Stage 1 offers. Jawan Taylor, George Karlaftis, Malik Hooker, Trenton Simpson, and B.J. Ojulari. 4 guys on defense, really looking to strengthen that side of the ball while helping out the offensive line. And after the first stage, we ended up signing 4 of the 5. George Karlaftis, unsurprisingly, did not sign with us, but we're able to bring in everybody else, so I would certainly consider this a win. Jawan Taylor, Malik Hooker, and Trenton Simpson are all new additions to the St. Louis Dragons, and B.J. Ojulari is back. So we replaced Jedrick Wills with basically a player of the same caliber, and we added the defense, bringing back Ojulari and adding some new guys in Hooker and Simpson, who I think are going to be upgrades from what we had. Karlaftis, meanwhile, ends up in Indianapolis as he will be signing with the Colts following our defensive coordinator, who, of course, is now their head coach and was previously in Kansas City with Karlaftis. So here in Stage 2, we're going to offer some depth guys, a handful of players who were already on our roster, and some other reserves. And after simulating into Stage 3, all 5 players who ended up offering as depth guys end up accepting. So I don't think we need to shell out any more offers here in Day 3. We did everything that we wanted to. Let's take a look at the trade market now, and we will not be making any trades, but there are a number of deals around the league that I want to go over. We're going to start from smallest to biggest. The first of which is Cole Kmet going to the Saints for 2 fifth-rounders. The Saints are adding another weapon for their young quarterback, Callaghan October. A reunion in Cleveland. Amari Cooper is going from the Titans to the Browns for a 4th. Cleveland has not really had a wide receiver 1 since Amari Cooper left. So now they bring him back. And speaking of reunions with Cleveland, the Browns also signed Jedrick Wills back. They're bringing the band back together. Next up, the Green Bay Packers, who were the worst team in the NFL, are going to be trading Elgton Jenkins and the top pick of the 5th round to the Jets for a 3rd-rounder. The Jets are adding some reinforcements to the offensive line, while the Packers add another top 100 pick. Now we're getting to the spicy stuff. Elijah Wan-Mbasa, a talented young pass rusher with the Eagles, is going to Kansas City to replace George Karlaftis for a future 2nd, a 5th, and a young corner. Mbasa's on the last year of his deal, and it doesn't look like the Eagles want to pay him long-term. Ed Oliver is going to the Chargers for the 41st overall pick. Oliver's on the last year of his deal, but he has still gotten better and better throughout his young career and still has a lot of long-term value. And then here's the big one. Dexter Lawrence and Taco Prince are going to the Falcons for 2 first-round picks and a 4th. Dexter Lawrence has been a defensive player of the year type of guy for the last 5 years. He's coming off the best year of his career, but he's on the last year of his deal, and the Giants don't want to break the bank for him. Atlanta does, and giving up 2 first-round picks for a player of his caliber is worth it, and not to mention they're getting another starter with Taco Prince. So let's simulate to the end of free agency now. Overall, I would consider it a win for us. We had some talent on both sides of the ball, and we don't make any financially crippling decisions because, again, we're going to have to pay Puma Whitlock and Simeon Bonnet. Around the league, Tyreek Hill signs with the Saints. New Orleans is committed to adding weapons for Callaghan October. Kyle Hamilton signs with the Giants. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't tempted by him, but again, I don't want to break the bank on anyone. Travarius Ward to the Texans, continuing the Niners to Houston pipeline. Lucas Van Ness signs with Atlanta. The Falcons are serious about making this pass rush legit. DeAndre Swift signs with the Bears. I'm going to miss him, but I think it's in our best interest to go younger. Deshaun Watson back with the Rams. I don't know why the Rams took it this far to begin with. They should have re-signed him earlier. Kenny Pickett signs with the Steelers again, I would hope as a backup. And Jordan Love finally gets out of Green Bay. He signs with the Jets, which is kind of weird because they had Trey Lance last year who played pretty well. So I don't know what the Jets' plan at quarterback is. That's going to wrap up the episode. Next time around will be our draft preview. We haven't done our college football recap yet, and that's because I'm going to be combining that with the preview to try to shorten the offseason a little bit. And then, of course, the following episode will be the 2026 NFL Draft. I hope everybody enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.